It's always a pleasure to say one of our most treasured regulars here at Securing America is with us. His name is Kevin Freeman. He is the host of an absolutely marvelous television podcast and broadcast program, Economic War Room. You can find out much more about it at economicwarroom.com, which I really commend to you all. Kevin, you covered a lot of ground there, sort of, well, philosophical, sociological, theological level. And I want to come back to the very practical right now. As you've indicated, in response to this horrific invasion and brutal attack on the people of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin and his military, governments all over the world, with the notable exception of, I guess, China and it seems India as well, and maybe a few others, but most countries, certainly in Europe, the United States, the civilized world, if you will, have retaliated against Putin with an array of economic sanctions and other, well, economic warfare techniques. Characterize both the nature of those weapons in the battle space that you're so proficient in, their effectiveness, and the possible, perhaps unintended effects of them.
Frank, I find it ironic that we're primarily waging an economic war. And if you do a Google search, I did one the other day, and 372,000 news items showed up that used the term economic warfare. When I started talking to the Pentagon, and we had a relationship then. Literally, I was told inside the building, economic warfare sounds well and good, but there's no way it can ever stop. If they roll tanks, you can't win. And
Right.
bottom line is, I said, no, this is how to do it. DARPA had me come in and I had to explain to DARPA how you could use this as an offensive weapon. And we're seeing things that they denied even were possible 10, 15 years ago when I was talking about them happening right now. And that is, you can shut down a country by controlling its banking system. You can shut down a country by stopping trade policies and by manipulating stock markets and by undermining inside the country economically. And we're using all of those weapons from the West. And as you noted, there's a distinction. China, Russia, India. Wow, wait, this is sounding like the BRICS nations minus Brazil. And they have for years, as I pointed out in my blog, planned for, prepared for, and to develop systems to not only parallel what they see in the West, but also defend against these sorts of attacks. So we're watching a battle take place that's identical to what I've written about for a dozen years, and it's happening before our eyes. And that's the same kind of technique. Go ahead.
Well, let me just back up just a moment, Kevin, because first of all, to acknowledge, your prescience in understanding this battle space and trying to get, I remember it very well, trying to get the Defense Department to appreciate its importance and to integrate it into their planning and operations, for that matter. And as you say, they weren't so interested at the time, and really, I think much of the rest of the world hasn't been either until very lately. So it's great credit to you that your thinking, your analysis has been now embraced as fully as it has. But something that you didn't say explicitly, but I think certainly is implicit in what you did say, is you can use these kinds of economic weapons if you have the reserve currency of the world and the cooperation of others who want that to be the case, and the systems that are sort of predicated on it, like this so-called SWIFT system, for example, are all going to be sustained. So that brings us to the point that you were just making, and that is, well, what if other people who don't want you to have the reserve currency of the world, who don't want to be susceptible to the kind of punishment that makes possible, engineer workarounds? So talk a little bit about that point, the vital necessity of our remaining, the dollar remaining the reserve currency of the world, the challenges to its status, and whether we will in fact see these workarounds effectively enforced or catalyzed, let me say, by this kind of economic warfare taking the dollar down.
Well, I wish, Frank, that I could take credit for it. What I actually did was I noticed what Russia, in particular, Russia, China, elements in the Middle East, were planning, plotting, and doing, and they were aware of the dollar reserve status and how important that was for American power. So they began to develop these systems. I noticed that and noticed the financial terror attack that took place in 2008. They have created and they understand the dollar is the primary currency that's used by people around the world. If you want to hold extra money, you buy US Treasury bonds and stick them in your safe. But if a government realizes that the United States might cut off your ability to use, sell, exchange, barter those Treasury bonds, then they say, well, that's not good money anymore. So we need better money to put in there, whether it's gold or whether they create the digital yuan or they create some other form of currency to hold, or they hold euros instead of dollars, etc. And that's what's taken place, is that these nations have decided that the dollar is no longer the safe holding for them, because we use it against terror groups, but now we use this weapon against a nation state. And by doing so, we put the entire reserve currency at risk. If we lost the reserve currency, our inflation rate goes from 7.9%, where it is today, to 15, 20, 30, much higher percentage, because we can't finance all our spending. We think we can, we assume it, we act like we can, but we can't, because we have to depend on either the Federal Reserve printing money or we have to depend on other governments buying our debt and holding our debt.
So when you look at these reserve currency alternatives, Kevin, I'm endlessly told, well, there just really isn't any alternative to the dollar. You've mentioned a couple candidates, but at the end of the day, I'm told, look, they have to be convertible and people have to want to hold and be paid in those other currencies. Do you see a realistic prospect that whether it's some basket of special drawing rights, whatever those are, for example, or a currency out of China, crypto, or the yuan, gold backed, or so? I mean, what else is out there that could realistically compete with the dollar or actually supplant it?
Well, all right. So that's a valid point. People will have to want to take the alternative. Here's the counterpoint. Number one is, if you tell them that if we get mad at you, you can't play with our ball, you'll go find another ball. And it could be gold, it could be digital. Look at Bitcoin and how rapidly that's risen in prominence in such a short period of time. There are
Prominence
better.
and value.
Yes, there are better alternatives that are available today than old U.S. paper money. And in fact, there are better alternatives, such that the President of the United States signed an executive order that to explore creating a digital dollar as a better alternative to the current holdings. So there's no question in my mind the dollar will at some point, in its current form, lose its reserve currency status. Question is, what will it be replaced with? And right now, the Chinese are making a case, and have been for a dozen years, through the Belt and Road Initiative and through trading arrangements and so forth. They've convinced the Saudis to consider taking Chinese yuan instead of U.S. dollars, and that's called the petrodollar. When the Saudis require you be paid in U.S. dollars, if that breaks, that is one more prop underneath the dollar, and it's something I've talked about for a long time. We cannot be so full of ourselves to imagine that our system, our ball, is the only one the world will ever play with. We have to make it attractive, we have to make it interesting, and we have to make it better. And frankly, right now, we're not doing that. We're just being arrogant.
I know you have a very creative idea on this subject, and I'm anxious to have you talk about it, but we're hard out of time for doing it today. Kevin Freeman, thank you for this really wonderful sort of overview of the situation we find ourselves in, as I say, on a whole host of levels, but most especially in the economic warfare battle space. Keep up the great work, my friend, and come back to us again very soon. Next up, we'll speak with my colleague Kyle Scheidler about the narco war at our border and what it means for you right after this.